Welcome to the sixth meeting of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry and Technology. Just a very quick mention, there's a little technical glitch which is showing, I think, that we are in camera on Zoom. We're not in camera. We are public. So this is being broadcast publicly, but my understanding, I'm told, is that the witnesses may see that it says in camera on their link. So just to clarify, this is not in camera. In other words, your testimony is public, and we are streaming live to the public this meeting. Also wanted to mention that tous les témoins ont effectué les tests de connexion.
All witnesses have conducted the required connection tests.
The required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Colleagues, just a reminder, and to witnesses, if you're not using your earpiece here in the room, please make sure that you've got it on the stickers in front of you to protect the health and well-being of our interpreters. So, colleagues, we are continuing with our productivity study today. We've got three witnesses, two of whom will provide opening remarks. And then we'll do a little transition over after the first hour as we move into the next line of questioning. Witnesses, if you have any problems at any point with your technology, just put your hand up in the window there and let us know. We've got from the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, Ryan Greer here with us today, Senior Vice President, Public Affairs and National Policy. Et puis, on a aussi de la Fédération des Chambres.
And we also have the Federation of the Quebec Chamber of Commerce, the Vice President of Public Affairs and Market Access, Mr. Philippe Noel, and also
Professor Hubert Réau, who is with us as well. So, with that, Mr. Greer, I'm going to turn the floor to you for the first upwards of 5 minutes of introductory remarks. Puis, Monsieur Noel, après.
And then, Mr. Noel, after Mr. Greer is done, you'll have 5 minutes, and then we'll start the question round after your testimony.
Greer, the floor is yours, sir, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair and members of the committee, and I am pleased to be here on behalf of Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, one of the oldest and largest trade associations in Canada, representing thousands of manufacturers from coast to coast. Manufacturing is the backbone of Canada's economy, employing 1.8 million Canadians, generating over $200 billion in real GDP, and driving 2/3 of Canada's value-added exports. Yet, weak productivity growth continues to hold our sector back. Canada's labour productivity lags nearly 30% behind the U.S., and business investment per worker has dropped to half of U.S. levels. This gap leaves our economy exposed. The best defence for Canadian companies, workers, and families against tariffs, protectionism, and other external shocks is a strong and productive domestic manufacturing base. Not all productivity gains are created equal. Manufacturing matters more. Manufacturing is unique because it drives innovation, investment, and skills development across the entire economy. When manufacturers invest in new equipment or processes, the benefits spill over into other sectors. When they adopt advanced technologies, those innovations diffuse outward. And because manufacturing is both capital intensive and trade exposed, productivity improvements in this sector translate directly into higher wages, stronger exports, and more resilient supply chains. Before I get into some solutions, I want to stress that productivity isn't just something we as a trade association talk about, it is what we do every day. CME works directly with manufacturers across Canada to provide practical lean training and continuous improvement programs to help them cut waste, boost efficiency, and stay competitive. That shop floor commitment to productivity is also what drives the productivity reforms we're here to talk about today. I'd like to highlight 3 opportunities to improve manufacturing productivity and competitiveness. The first is tax policy. Canada's overall tax burden on business investment is too high and the system is too complex. Manufacturers tell us that predictability and simplicity matter just as much as rates. If the system is difficult to navigate, investment flows elsewhere. The competitiveness of Canada's corporate tax system is difficult to measure precisely, but one reality is clear. Recent U.S. tax reforms, notably through the Big Beautiful Bill, have made Canada relatively less attractive for new manufacturing investment. That bill strongly incentivizes domestic investment in U.S. production through a series of tax changes. The biggest benefit is immediate expensing of short-lived assets, 100% deduction for a production plant, more favorable R&D incentives, and a more favorable international tax regime. Our close attention to U.S. trade policy is obviously warranted, but we cannot ignore the effect of their tax reforms as well. The second area I'd like to identify is around trade and transportation infrastructure investment. Canada's productivity and, frankly, our resilience hinge on having efficient transportation networks. Investments in trade-enabling infrastructure have the virtue of making all of its users, our members, Canadian manufacturers, more productive. Canada needs more targeted public and private investments to build new trade-enabling infrastructure and maximize the efficiency of the infrastructure that already exists. And third, I'd like to just flag regulatory burden. This is where we see some of the biggest and lowest cost opportunities to boost productivity. Manufacturers, especially small and medium-sized ones, consistently cite regulatory burden as a top barrier to growth. They face a system that is fragmented, duplicative, and unpredictable. Every advanced economy wrestles with regulatory drag to some extent. Bold action on this front could differentiate ourselves from competitors and attract investment that we are losing out on today. The flaw with past federal red tape reduction efforts is that they target isolated irritants instead of undertaking the systemic reforms needed to improve regulatory outcomes across all decision-making. It's like pumping air into a leaky tire. It might help you in the short term, but the underlying problem goes unsolved. CME's Regulate Better, Grow Faster report lays out a roadmap, and I would just sort of quickly highlight a few key recommendations from it before I wrap up. The first is that we think the federal government should legislate competitiveness and growth mandates for all federal regulators. Regulators should be required to give appropriate consideration to the potential impact of their activities on economic growth, not as an afterthought, but as a statutory obligation. Second, we believe the federal government should expand the scope of the current one-for-one rule. Despite the rule, government-imposed requirements on businesses continue to increase because the law itself has some carve-outs in it, and it also excludes legislated obligations, ministerial guidance, and other non-regulatory requirements that are imposed on businesses. We think these gaps must be closed to truly contain the proliferation of red tape. Third, we think there's an opportunity to strengthen the oversight of the cost-benefit analysis process that underpins all new regulations. Regulators can and do play with the numbers as parts of these analyses to present overly optimistic analyses that justify new rules. To fix this, Canada should create an independent body modeled after the UK Regulatory Policy Committee to publicly grade the quality of regulatory impact assessments. A similar body in Canada would ensure that all cost-benefit analyses are credible, realistic, and transparent. These and some other systemic reforms would fundamentally change and improve how we regulate, providing significant long-term benefits to our manufacturing sector and the broader economy. Chair, members, Canada's productivity crisis is real, urgent, and we hope that your work today and over the preceding meetings will help spark the bold action that is required. It is only through achieving higher productivity can Canada's manufacturers compete globally while offering its workers better jobs and rising real wages. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks very much, Mr. Greer. Monsieur Noel, 5 minutes.
Mr. Noel, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Vice Chairs and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you today. Just so you know, we are the biggest Chamber of Commerce in Quebec. We represent 120 businesses, and we have looked at productivity investments for many years now. And in March, we published the Blue Book on productivity, and I will have my colleague with me, Hubert Rioux, who worked on it also. Now, in terms of productivity in Quebec and in Canada, we looked at how to increase productivity. In 2023, each hour worked in Canada led to about $14 less in productivity in the rest of the OECD and $17 less than in the U.S. So this has a negative impact not just on our industries but also on our collective wealth. In 2023, the GDP in Canada was $4,500 less per person, per capita rather, than the OECD, and $21,000 less than in the U.S. And so in terms of productivity, there's private investments that lag behind by 45% compared to the advanced economies of the OECD, and nearly 60% of that in the U.S. There's also a major risk. We have to know that these risks are being worsened by the various problems we just talked about in three ways. First, our relative prices, the relative prices rather of our exports, means that we have less revenue. There's also less liquidity for our businesses for innovation to meet the requirements of international markets, and there's a limiting factor in terms of our production of lower value goods. There are many problems, but there are three main ones. The international competitiveness index puts Canada at the 26th rank, rather, and also there are more taxes in Canada also than in the U.S. and elsewhere. There's also 80% of businesses that we represent show that various red tape and other requirements are going up year by year. There's also delays in treating various files and different orders of government doing the same work and so on that lead to problems. So very few businesses can take advantage of these exportation opportunities, and it's a vicious circle. The small businesses that we represent have less to export, and then they have less money because they don't have as many markets. So there are huge structural problems. So we have a few recommendations, for example, in terms of taxes to improve the situation for SMEs by reducing numbers, and also supporting research and development for science and innovation for small businesses, and also to produce and go forward with some measures that were announced, for example, for patents. And there are more opportunities in the mining and defense sectors also. Now, we recommend simplifying and broadening the criteria for accessing subsidies, for converting also some of the tax subsidy or tax break systems that we have in place. There are two tax reports that are required for businesses in Quebec at both the national level and the federal level. And there's also recognizing the large pension investors at the federal level also. And there's also Canada Exports that will promote more help and also helping promote our SMEs, and also taking away some of the tax burdens on the SMEs when they are trying to open up to new markets. Thank you very much for your attention, and we are here and happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Noel.
In our line of questioning, Madame Dancho, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for your testimony thus far, and thank you for being here. My questions are primarily for Mr. Green. You spoke a lot about in your opening about the challenges faced by Canadian manufacturers, and I know your organization represents, I think, well over 1,000 members. 90% of them are SMEs or small, medium-sized businesses. You also mentioned you employ almost 2 million Canadians and produce billions in GDP for Canada. So I think your members certainly have a good idea of what's going on, certainly vis-a-vis the tariff situation and the changing geopolitical dynamic Canada is experiencing. You also mentioned that there's considerably less investment, unfortunately, in Canadian companies and individual workers and the capital in Canada versus the United States. I think you mentioned 1/3 in previous testimony. And so can you just describe in brief why that should matter to Canadians, the productivity increase and the like? Why should Canadians care about this issue?
Well, thank you, and I think I think that's one of the most important questions to frame up your work with this study is to translate what something as obscure sounding as productivity and where Canada rests in OECD rankings or business investment per worker. What does that mean? It means that Canadian manufacturers and other Canadian workers, there is less business investment in supporting them to do their jobs, to produce more, to help generate higher real wages for them, their coworkers, and of course the families and the communities they operate in. So, as I noted in my remarks, it's only by increasing productivity can we ensure that Canadian firms can better compete, which means we can hire more and pay better, and take advantage of new market opportunities, whether those be through the U.S., where most of our sector still exports, or even to take advantage of new market opportunities. In the context of the current trade crisis, there's been a lot of talk about diversification and how do we better diversify. And the answer is partially through, of course, market access and tools to support manufacturers, especially SMEs, to figure out how to access those markets. But really it lies in making us more competitive and productive, because ultimately Canada is a somewhat high-cost jurisdiction to do business. We have benefited for decades due to our proximity and integration with the U.S., but our ability to compete and carve out new market access, our ability to withstand tariff pressures and other political tactics from south of the border really depends on our ability to invest in our facilities, to invest in the capital stock, to give Canadian manufacturers access to the technologies that are being deployed in our competitor markets, and to continue building some of the best products in the world at the best prices in a most reliable way.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that, outlining that very well. And my understanding is that Canada has had significant challenges with productivity decline and capital outflow to the U.S. primarily over the last number of years, but that's really been cranked up in the last six to 8 months. In particular, you mentioned the big, beautiful bill in your opening remarks from the Trump administration, and notable production tax credits or tax deferrals and things like that in that bill. And so should Canada be looking at something like that? I mean, when we talk about tax reform, and I know this is a dream of the Conservative Party and other political institutions to really do that, but that could take a long time to really reformulate our entire tax structure. Are there anything that could be quite immediate, sort of perhaps a tax deferral on capital gains or something like that could provide immediate relief within the next year or two? Is that something that we should be looking at?
Yeah, I think it has to be an all-of-the-above approach, which is we need to be thinking, how do we verse what is a long-term, multi-decade-long trend that, of course, has been brought into intense focus over the last several months, and that draws to simplifying the tax code, as I said, making it easier to navigate, making a straighter line between those who wish to invest and them trying to understand what that means. But in the current environment, I also think we need to be looking at every short-term incentive possible to do everything we can, not just to say that we want investment in Canada, but to make it undeniable, to make Canada an undeniable investment opportunity. And certainly I think in the context of capital depreciation, in terms of some current capital cost initiatives that are due to expire in the next couple of years, in the context of doing a competitive analysis of all the incentives under the big, beautiful bill and trying to draw some lines to understand directly where some of the weaker points are relative to Canadian tax law, I think that's really important. It has to be, as I said, all of the above when we're trying to think how to sort of defend and go on the offensive in terms of bringing that investment here.
Thank you. With our last minute, the Department of Industry, from what I've learned, meeting with businesses, many members of yours, of course, this industry is, I think, $8 or $9 billion of various tax incentives and programs and things like that are supposed to really support the issues and that you've outlined and other businesses have outlined to help generate some productivity, some IP, things like that. Are there programs that you've come across in the industry department that are particularly helpful or could be helpful if they were rejigged? Can you just touch on any thoughts that come to mind on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not directly through industry, but one of the biggest ones you'll all be well aware of is, of course, the SHRED program, of which it is incredibly important to our members, but it is also very difficult to navigate. There's a lot of uncertainty, and we often talk to members about access to certain programs or tax credits, and they'll say it was very helpful to my business. I greatly appreciate it, but if I had to make the same decision, I'm not sure I would have applied in the first place. A lot of our federal programming is designed, of course, to stop bad actors, but that framing sort of is how many officials or the programs will engage businesses directly, which is that everybody's trying to defraud the government as opposed to trying to be enablers that are going to help Canadian companies succeed. And so it's not to say that we don't need to have strong measures in place, but I think we do need to find ways to continue to simplify these programs When we sit down with small and medium-sized members of ours, and there's a menu of dozens of different programs across the RDAs and various other departments, including industry, and we try to walk them through what is required, and then they start to think through what kind of consultant or other external support they'd need just to access these. It's a lot, especially because these are folks who are operators themselves. They are managing the floor. They do not have a big compliance department to help them manage these things. So I think trying to simplify all programs that are designed to support these types of investments, I think, is a good place to start.
Thank you, Madame Dancho. Mr. Bardizzi for 6 minutes.
Thank you. A few questions to Ryan, and then a few questions to our friends online. I guess I want to start with the threats to the auto sector and the very specific statements that President Trump has made about repatriating auto assembly. Could you speak to the importance of the auto sector in the context of the larger manufacturing sector in which it resides?
Thank you for the question. And I mean, the automotive sector really is the engine of Southern Ontario specifically, and in the Great Lakes region, these integrated supply chains. And so, when we see both what the administration has expressed in terms of their goal, and then some of the both tariff and tax policies that they are putting in place to do it, it is incredibly challenging for tens of thousands of workers who've now found themselves either unemployed or in precarious employment because of this. And it's challenging for, of course, our members because there are not Swedish automakers that are, pining for Canadian auto parts. We have built up a deeply integrated sector to everyone's benefit, including the United States, over decades. And now, that is trying to be unwound in a very unproductive way. And so I'm somewhat concerned that there's been opinions expressed that Canada's overall tariff level right now isn't so bad compared to the rest of the world. And while that might be true in certain instances, where the damage is being impacted is in the manufacturing sector. Where the damage is being most acutely felt is by families that are supported by manufacturing jobs in Southern Ontario, around Montreal, and some other clusters around the country. And obviously the automotive sector on the parts side and on the OEM side are being most directly impacted by that, and we are hopeful that some level of sectoral relief could come in the near term because our members need it.
Our other study that our committee is doing is on defense industrial policy, and there's a relationship between the possible benefits of that and your sector. Can you talk to us a bit about how the industrial and technological benefits policy may be working or not? And how that could work better as part of a reframed industrial policy? Yeah,
it's a great question. I think Canada's ITB policy is really important for Canadian manufacturers to ensure that they can participate in these North American, in some cases global supply chains, and help build and secure and provide the kit that Canada's military needs. I think there are opportunities to improve the program and that the government should be considering as it considers what a defense industrial strategy looks like. One of the hardest parts is for Canadian SMEs to feel connected to the government and its goals. Under the ITB policy, of course, it is through their supply chains and the large OEMs who have well-established relationships, who work with various contractors across the world and through the United States for various platforms that they've built in the past. It can be hard for an SME, to show and offer and compete to show how they could do something domestically that would be as good, if not better, within those supply chains. Two, it's hard for them to grow in terms of their relationship with the federal government because that small and medium-sized manufacturer has no connectivity to the government. It is only through the OEM supply chain that they have an opportunity to do what they can. So I think finding ways in a process to connect those innovative small and medium-sized manufacturers to help them grow within that framework needs to be an important consideration.
Thank you. And any specific advice that the CME might want to present in relation to that study that we're doing, I think would be very helpful. Monsieur Noël, vous avez votre livre bleu et...
Mr. Noël, you have your blue paper, and you provided recommendations also. In one of the sections, you talked about capitalization. decarbonization, rather. Could you tell us about the businesses that are involved in that in Quebec's economy, and if that's a clean tech sector or if it goes beyond just one sector in particular? Actually, there's a marked interest, really, that we see from businesses to grow their decarbonization, to reduce their carbon footprint, whether that's by reducing GHG emissions or by reusing and capturing what's produced within their own facilities. There are also procedures of the circular economy that prevents too much waste of the resources and reusing what's there. So that reduces costs, reduces carbon emissions. For example, there's a facility in Joliette that invested a lot of money in decarbonization of their operations, reusing heat that is generated to reduce energy consumption, and that reduces their operating costs also, and it improves decarbonization. That's just one example.
Merci bien.
Thank you very much. I think it's very important to hear about these kinds of stories from these businesses, just so that we get an idea of what the sector is doing. Could you switch to a different sector, for example, the aeronautics sector? Could you describe what's happening in Quebec in the time we have left? Well, the aeronautics sector is a big sector. Also, my colleague Hubert might be able to help us also and to complete my answer. There are challenges, however, in terms of the measures that are put in place by the different orders of government. It hits this sector, but others as well. There's a moratorium, and we have been asking for a moratorium under the restrictions on the temporary foreign workers programs changes. And also, we want local contracts, or rather local players, to be prioritized in providing contracts. We hope that it will be our aeronautics businesses that will be benefiting from these contracts. And we also want to draw attention to all of the subcontractors that provide value. And it's important to have tax relief and also regulatory relief so that they can be more productive and push further in their innovation. We expect, in terms of this industry, for various orders of government to make use of their expertise and their experience and really showcase them on the international front. There are tens of thousands and millions of contracts that are available in Europe, for example. We were in Europe recently on the ground to see and examine these opportunities. We think the federal government has the responsibility to really promote our businesses from here, and in addition to the industrial strategy that will be coming out soon. Thank you very much. Mr. Saint-Marie, 6 minutes. Microphone, please. Welcome to all of our witnesses. My questions will be for Mr. Noel and Mr. Rioux. Thank you very much for being here. So they represent 40,000 businesses, your members, 120 chambers of commerce, and your blue paper on productivity with the 40 recommendations is really well built and very complete. So thank you very much for the Bridgestone example, which is the main employer in the city of Joliette. Mr. Noel, you talked about the temporary foreign workers program. The SMEs in the manufacturing sector in my region, also in the metals transformation sector, have seen two trends. One is AI, robotization, and so on is used to reduce the number of TFWs, for example, for welders and others. But what they're telling us is that it takes many years. Others were surprised after employing temporary foreign workers to see the change and the reversal in what was being said in Ottawa and elsewhere. In the past, they were told, okay, go recruit elsewhere. That's the solution. Now they're saying, and now they're being told by the governments, no, figure it out. So what can the governments do to be more pragmatic and to listen to what SMEs have to say? Yes, well, the restrictions for TFW's program really impedes the growth of businesses that, as they are dealing with a lack of a qualified workforce. So it impacts our economies and our regions in particular. So we need these highly qualified workers. We have estimated that we need 106,000 qualified temporary foreign workers to be able to meet our demand. And it's necessary for the federal government to look again at all of the measures it has taken, because it threatens they threaten the growth of these industries, which represent millions and millions of dollars. So we need the government to rethink the restrictions on this program. That's what I've been saying for months at the Quebec level also. There's more openness on the part of Quebec, and now we're waiting for the federal government to act also. Thank you very much. That's been noted. Now, in March, you published your blue paper, as we mentioned earlier. What changed over the past several months since its publication? For example, our relationship with our neighbor to the south, the government's announcement that it wants to spend more on defense and development in the AI sector. I mean, what would be an update to make to your blue paper today? Thank you.
Hubert, t'es sur silencieux. Pardon.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I was muted. Thank you for that question. Many of the recommendations that we make in our budgetary memo complete the recommendations in our Blue Book and reflect the changes that have happened since. The most important one was the adoption of the One Big Beautiful Bill, as we mentioned earlier, that really put in place important tax measures for American businesses and made it much more difficult for businesses in Canada. For example, the bill or this new law means that corporations in the U.S. will, at the federal level, will be at 21%, but in Canada we're at 15%. But the combined cost in Canada, because there's the provincial level also, is usually much higher than what we see in the U.S. because many provinces also impose a 0 to 10% tax, provincial tax on big corporations. And so that's very different from what's happening in Ohio and Texas. So there's also reducing or deducting, rather, all the costs for R&D back to December 2021 retroactively for SMEs. And there's also the 100% amount that's imposed. So there are a lot of things being done in the U.S. to improve productivity, and we could be looking at what was done there. I'd say that would be a priority. Thank you very much. In that context, my colleague asked you about decarbonization. With what's happening in the U.S., decarbonization is becoming secondary to the Quebec economy. Is that secondary and less important in Quebec, or is it still important? Well, actually, it's something that we still hear a lot about. We created a network for decarbonization. It was created with energy experts to explain to large corporations and SMEs also what to do, the method to follow for decarbonization. There was Bridgestone, of course, as an example, but there are others. An SME that is reinvesting to improve eco-efficiency and energy efficiency for its operations just by tipping up windows or completely replacing the lights they use. There are all kinds of measures that can be taken both by SMEs and large corporations. So we still feel that there's a need for that. And we have hydroelectricity, we have wind energy, we have more and more renewable electricity also, solar panels. So there are many, many energy saving options that can contribute to reducing GHG emissions, but also to improving business productivity in terms of their operational costs. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Rioux? Oh, unfortunately, that's a great attempt, Mr. Saint-Marie, but your time is up for this round. But I appreciate your perspective.
The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you for your testimony so far. Mr. Greer, according to the National Bank of Canada, there's now over 105,000 regulations impacting manufacturing. And while we've been having some discussion about what the United States is doing, it seems like they're streamlining their regulatory framework, while here in Canada, we're kind of burring industry under regulatory burden. I think you yourself have even said the regulatory burdens are now even more impactful in some cases than the tariffs themselves. So I was wondering if you could describe for us what manufacturers are saying is the impact on the day-to-day environment with some of these regulatory burdens, especially when they're competing with U.S. firms.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the question. CME, we regularly connect with our members, obviously, on the ground, in their communities. We also have bodies called peer councils, which is where small groups of small and medium-sized manufacturer, sort of owner-operators can, compare notes on business challenges and help each other work through them. It's really an interesting and unique model, and I get the opportunity to join some of these calls or conversations, and it's remarkable to me how much time is spent in those conversations, not talking about dealing with a workforce issue or what they're doing to capture new customers or how they're managing a new technology implementation. So much of those calls is just comparing notes on how they're navigating regulatory burden, compliance requirements, and other challenges with all levels of government. And they don't always distinguish between a provincial requirement, a federal one, and a municipal one. But between all three levels of government, it adds up, and it takes so much of their time. So there's the cost to their business, of course, of complying with these. There's the opportunity cost of all the other things they could be doing to grow their business. And, it's the one thing when we survey our members, and we do that very regularly, asking for their biggest concerns and what sort of public policy changes would help them grow their business. And regulatory burden is almost always in one or two when we do those surveys. And so we consistently hear it, and burden does continue to proliferate. It's not to say that the one-for-one rule and other initiatives at all levels of government haven't helped manage it or tend to some of the more problematic regulations. But as I stressed in my remarks, and what our members want to see is not to fix one or two problematic regulations, and I know that's the easiest place to start. Tell us what's wrong, and we'll try to fix it. In the time you fix one, another dozen have popped up that maybe are based on a consultation process that didn't quite integrate or learn from what industry had to say. It's other requirements that have popped up through ministerial guidance or legislation or elsewhere that have just added new burden in the 12 or 18 months it might take us to fix one. So, as I said, our members are looking for governments to indicate not only that they understand this is a problem, but that they're going to do systemic reform to try to fix these challenges for the long term.
Do you believe the current regulatory framework is deterring foreign investment in the manufacturing sector?
Uncertainty is what drives a lot of this decision making, and obviously in the last 6 to 8 months, a lot of that uncertainty has come around trade policy. But prior to that, and even in the current context, we hear regulatory uncertainty cited repeatedly as a barrier to investment in our sector.
So in a report titled "The Atrophy of the Canadian Manufacturing Sector Has Gone Too Far," the National Bank of Canada highlights how from 2018 to the time of the article's publication, which was December 23rd, 2024, Canada's manufacturing sector regressed by over 5%, affecting no fewer than 15 of 18 manufacturing industries, calling this, and I quote, a concerning indicator of economic erosion. However, during the same time period, the U.S. manufacturing has grown by 10%. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a range of issues, but I put plainly, I would say we think that all of government apparatus at all levels of government should be focused on this question of productivity, growth, and competitiveness, because that's what's going to raise real wages, create jobs, generate government revenues to fund other priorities. And so, we think this is not a short-term trend. This is a long-term one. The investment in the manufacturing sector has been sluggish for, all of about 2 decades. In fact, it's so sluggish that we're unable to compensate for the depreciation of existing plants and machinery. So, put another way, we're not actually replacing existing capital as it wears out and grows obsolete because we're below that sort of neutral rate. And so there needs to be a real long-term think about how we can incentivize investment through all means possible. So it is tax, it is regulatory, it is programmatic reform. There is no one sort of key to turn on this one. It's looking at all the suite of various ways that governments help or in some cases hinder business investment. And as I said earlier, we want to make investment in Canada undeniable, not just attractive, but something that somebody needs to do or must do. And that's how we need to frame all of these decisions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gugelmin. Mr. Baines, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Greer, for joining us and for your work in this space, your organization, and sharing very critical information for us on this topic of productivity. Canada ships a significant amount of raw materials outside of Canada for processing, and then we re-import it to a finished product. If you can maybe share with us, like in some cases this is regulatory, and for example, in my home province of British Columbia, there's a rule that if you are to process food, you have to grow 50% of it on your own farm. So, how can we retain more of the value-added processing here in Canada?
Sure, thanks. It's a great question. So you're absolutely correct in terms of what we export and how we export. When we think of our north-south relationship, almost 3/4 of what we export to the U.S. is parts, ingredients, and components that integrate into U.S. manufacturing processes. So these are not finished consumer goods, and it's also very much true of most of what the U.S. exports to Canada, outlining how deeply integrated our manufacturing sector is. So that is a net good. When we think of Canada-U.S., it really is a sector that works together and to build things to compete with the rest of the world as opposed to each other. But I think, recent months have illustrated that we need to do a long look at all of the rules and requirements and incentives that might have somebody value add, that might have somebody looking for a domestic market. They might be looking for a way to value add within Canada. Again, to repeat myself, I think regulatory burden, rules like the one that you've cited, while might have made sense in a current context or in a previous context earlier, we need to look at all of our priors to decide, does this make sense? Are we ensuring that we can add as much value to a product as possible in Canada? And that the answer may be in some cases that we don't need to or we don't want to. We're extracting a lot of benefit by selling it to customers in the U.S. or abroad. But taking a look at all of those rules, requirements, and incentives that have caused investors to make those decisions, which isn't to do those value-added processes in Canada.
Can you share your thoughts on the removal of internal trade barriers and impacts there?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I mean, it is one of the biggest opportunities for growth. I don't need to outline all the figures. I'm sure members of this committee have heard them many times around the potential to grow Canadian GDP and create tens of thousands of jobs. It is important to remember that these barriers are not hard tariff barriers. These are, in most cases, small regulatory differences that have been created across provincial borders. So the way you produce or sell a product in one province is subject to different rules than another. Obviously, the labor requirements based on various certifications and boards, which means we've created, a series of small markets instead of one large market. We are encouraged by the recent movement of the last 6 or 7 months. We've been shaken out of our complacency on internal trade, and we've seen a number of these bilateral trade agreements announced by the provinces to look at mutual recognition. I'm a little worried that some of that momentum seems to be fading a little bit. Everybody was talking about at all levels of government, we're going to do everything to remove these barriers, and now I don't hear as much. I know a lot of that means work is happening behind the scenes to actually look at what does mutual recognition look like. But we do think that strong leadership at all levels of government to continue to aggressively try to remove these barriers, to commit to mutual recognition, which is really the key. Trying to align regulations is a long, slow, and painful process. for those involved at least, whereas mutual recognition says if you produce a good or sell a good in a way that is legal in one province, it should be considered legal and lawful in another, and we think that's the answer, and we hope all provinces start to move even more aggressively in that direction in the months ahead.
Thank you. I have a quick question for either of Monsieur Noel or Monsieur Ryu. In August, a consortium of Ford Motor Company and South Korean companies said they would build a $1.2 billion plant to produce electric vehicle battery materials in Bécancour, Quebec. Can you expand on the reasons that Canada secured this investment in the middle of a very competitive environment for private capital investment? Mute. You're on mute, sir.
Pardonnez-moi, je ne...
My apologies. I don't know the details of the project or why that project was put forward, so I'd rather not say anything about it.
Merci. Thank you, Mr. Baines. Monsieur Saint-Marie, 2 minutes, 30 secondes.
You have 2.5 minutes, Mr. Saint-Marie. Mr. Rioux, if you could remind us of something that we heard during this meeting, the importance of having high-quality transport infrastructure, especially in the regions. Yes, this is an argument that we've been putting forward for a number of years and months. One of the problems that we have in Quebec and in Canada is the quality of the infrastructure and the challenges in maintaining our infrastructure. We're talking a lot about diversifying our exports, and with good reason, for example, because we are dependent on the American markets. But in order to export more products and diversify our export markets, we need to be able to move our products around efficiently around the country. So that's why we need infrastructure projects, for example, the port project, and railways and roads are also very important. Currently, most of our goods going to the U.S. get there by truck or by rail. But if we want to be able to send our products towards Europe or Asia, for example, we have to make sure that we have more capacity in our airports and our ports. So throughout the regions in Quebec, we need infrastructure to be properly maintained, and also we need to broaden our transport capacity in the various regions by increasing access to infrastructure. Thank you. Now, in terms of exports and diversifying markets, the SSQ states that there needs to be more support, SMEs in exporting their products. Could you give us some details, please? Yes, absolutely. Currently, one of the problems we're facing in Canada is that our businesses are quite small compared to our competition overseas. Many of our SMEs are not competitive enough on the international scale to be able to export their products. In order to be able to do so, they first need support on the tax front, which is why we're proposing that some of the revenues from exports be exempt from taxes to access international markets. And we need to change our current approach, for example, in the Can Export programs where we see fly in, fly out. We fund our SMEs' participation to trade shows and we do market analysis and so on. That's great, but we need to fund their operations and helping our businesses and SMEs get set up in other countries and our supply chains also to go to the international level. So we need even more support to SMEs in order to access international markets. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Saint-Marie.
A little bit over time, and we have to transition again, so I'm just going to knock these next two down to 2.5 minutes apiece to keep us a little bit more on time. Mr. Falk for 2.5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for your presentations here at committee today. Mr. Greer, I'd like to build on a few of the comments that you've been making. And when you speak to your members and you get feedback from them on why they're not expanding their businesses, why they're not making the investments in machinery and equipment that would help them move to the next level, What is their responses that you're receiving from them? Is it based on access to labor, access to markets, access to capital? Can you comment maybe briefly on all three of those?
Yeah, happy to. And it is really all three, and it depends on the business and where they are in their life cycle, where they're located. If you're in the Lower Mainland and you're looking to expand, but you've got to get a new facility that is now going to be 2 bridges away for most of your workforce, you're probably going to lose most of that workforce. And so, the transportation infrastructure, gridlock, and availability of industrial land might be the thing that stops you in the Lower Mainland. If you're in Southern Ontario and you're looking at, what some of the requirements might be if you increase the size of your workforce by a certain amount, or a new piece of technology kit that you're looking to adopt, that may drop you. Obviously, some of the uncertainty in the tariff environment. We've had manufacturers who are looking to make major equipment purchases, but these have 6-8 month lead times. They're not certain if a piece of equipment that is not being tariffed now certainly could be from 6 to 8 months from now. So it is really significantly wide-ranging, but ultimately it is access to capital that can help, and access to investment that can help fix a lot of that, deal with a lot of those problems, and being able to attract that kind of investment is the biggest barrier.
And yet, if I could, often when the government issues tax credits as an incentive to make investments in manufacturing, they're non-refundable or refundable. And could you explain a little bit to the committee the difference between refundable and non-refundable tax credits, and why there's an environment for each one and when it would be best used?
Yeah, I think to back up a step, and I know we're low on time, when we talk to manufacturers, they look at the overall complexity of the system, including the range of credits, refundable and non, and they're challenged on, this is just more that I need to do, this is an opportunity, who am I going to have to pay to help me do it? So I think, not to skip past the question, I think there's an important environment for both refundable and non, but I mean, part of the reason our overall tax code is so challenging is because it is a mix and mash of various incentives of both kind, when we think simplicity and lower rates would actually help drive some of the investment that we're seeking.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Falk. Madame O'Rourke, 2 minutes, 30 secondes à vous.
Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Greer. I'm from Guelph. So 1 in 5 homes rely directly on advanced manufacturing. So your testimony really hits home, and I think it's important to find what will work. So on a couple of fronts, I'll combine my questions. 2024 had a record foreign direct investment in Canada of $85.5 billion, which was a 36% increase from 2023, the best performance in over a decade. So what was working in that context? So what do we keep? We're talking about what we change, but what do we keep that is working well to attract foreign direct investment? And then I'm going to tag on to my question. We have the Regional Tariff Incentive Fund now to help any tariff-affected business to retool, to pivot to other things, with up to $1 billion in Southwestern Ontario, up to $1 million in a non-repayable loan. So how do you think that is resonating among manufacturers, and where do you think the opportunity to maximize that is?
Well, thank you for the question. So in terms of what's attracting FDI, and specifically in 2024, I mean, a big part, the biggest part of what makes Canada an attractive market and a good place to set up a manufacturing facility is our proximity and access to the U.S. market. And we will never be able to diversify ourselves away from the U.S. market and our reliance on it. So, the best way to fix our U.S. problem is to fix our U.S. problem. And that's going to help us on the investment side. Because again, outside investment is not just investing in Southern Ontario, although that's where they might be going. It's investing in the Great Lakes manufacturing ecosystem that has been deeply integrated to the benefit of communities, families on both sides of the border for decades. And so I think in terms of what works, step one is fixing our U.S. problem. Then step two is moving on to everything else that we've been talking about here today. In terms of the regional tariff supports, we're encouraged that those funds have been made available. As I mentioned earlier, our sector is the one being hit first and hit hardest by U.S. action, and it's important that the government have the flexibility to respond and support manufacturers given the unique needs. it is significant investment and business decision to consider retooling or pivoting or trying to find a new customer abroad compared to somebody you'd been serving maybe a few hundred kilometers south of you in the Great Lakes region. So trying to de-risk those investments as much as possible is going to be an important part of that. Obviously, some skills retraining and support for workers who, tens of thousands who have been displaced and we're looking for new opportunities. That is certainly important. And, I think the marker for success for us on these programs will be, is the money moving quickly? Is the red tape that's attached to it, the programmatic steps required to access funding, is it reasonable and appropriate for the speed in which those funds are needed for manufacturers? And so we're looking forward to hearing more as the programs roll out in the months ahead to make sure that those things are happening.
Rourke, I of course have to be nonpartisan in my chair. Mr. Greer, Monsieur Rioux, Monsieur Noël, merci beaucoup d'être ici avec nous ce matin. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your testimony. Colleagues, we're going to suspend briefly as we transfer over. questioning here today. We've got two new witnesses, both joining us virtually. We've got Associate Professor from the Department of Finance and Economics at l'Université de Québec at Trois-Rivières, Monsieur Marc Duhamel. And I know I'm supposed to be unbiased in the chair, but anytime there's a Manitoban that is willing to make themselves available to us, I have to, of course, highlight that. So we've got Neil Fast, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer of Low and Windows and Doors, a very proud Manitoban company. So, Mr. Fast, welcome to you. Je vais passer la parole à vous, Monsieur Duhamel, pour...
I'll give the floor to Mr. Duhamel for a maximum of 5 minutes, please, to start.
Ask for upwards of 5 minutes, and we'll then begin our line of questioning. À vous, Monsieur Duhamel.
You have the floor, Mr. Duhamel. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the members of the committee for this invitation to speak before you. I'll give you a brief introduction. My name is Marc Duhamel. I hold a PhD in economics from the University of British Columbia. I'm not only a professor in the Department of Finance and Economics at the UQTR, but I'm also a researcher at the Institute for Research on SMEs that has been recognized for over 25 years as one of the most important research institutes on SMEs and in entrepreneurship in the Francophonie and in the French-speaking world and beyond. Since 2023, I have also been the scientific director of the Observatoire du Reprenariat of Quebec. It is a provincial organization for economic development whose mission is to ensure the sustainability of Quebec businesses by promoting business succession. To avoid any misunderstandings, I would like to point out that my opinions are my own. They do not necessarily represent those of Reprenariat Québec, the Government of Quebec, the Institute for Research on SMEs, or the Université UQTR. I have been asked to testify about the productivity challenges in Canada. Although I'm not an expert on this issue, it is one that I know relatively well after working as an economist at the Competition Bureau and Industry Canada for 15 years, the last 4 of which were as Director of Microeconomic Research and Market Framework Policy. What brings me here today is an issue that seems to not have drawn the attention of many experts, even though it has been something that's very important and that we've seen over the last while, and that is the growing role of the transfer of businesses, which we call reprenariat in Quebec, and its potential to contribute to SMEs in Canada and in Quebec, and also, secondly, also the support of transfer of businesses in Canada, since we need second generations and further generations. So what is a business transfer? A business transfer is an economic exchange, often spread over several months and gradual, of ownership, control, and authority over the use of a business's assets to new owners that allows the business to continue its commercial activities. Often, for those buying the business, it is an opportunity to really grow the business, and that's something that can really change and further a small business in its life cycle, and it can help with innovations and so on. Some of my research activities have shown that there were 57,760 SME transfers in Canada, which is an increase of 25.8% compared to 2015. The aging of entrepreneurs means that many developed economies run the danger of losing their entrepreneurial heritage. For example, Japan lost 21% of its SMEs in just 15 years, according to the OECD. A Japanese scenario would represent the loss of approximately 285,000 active SMEs with employees across Canada over the next 15 years, mainly in regions far from major metropolitan areas. This risk is already very real in Canada. If I take the example of Quebec, the proportion of municipalities with fewer than 1,000 inhabitants that do not have retail buildings has jumped from 14.8% in 2015 to 22.7% in 2024, according to the Quebec Institute for Statistics, even though the number of municipalities with fewer than 1,000 inhabitants has changed little. Currently, Canada is seeing a huge wave of businesses that will be transferred or sold. Nearly 51,000 private businesses will be sold or transferred over the next 12 months, according to Statistics Canada. And in the medium term, more than 126,000 SME owners plan to sell or transfer their businesses over the next 60 months. And that was according to another study. So we need support for SMEs to ensure that the Japanese phenomenon does not repeat itself in Canada and in Quebec. So we have seen supports to businesses so that and young entrepreneurs and startups so that a new generation can come up that can be more innovative, but in terms of policies and ecosystems, there has been little impact aside from a few exceptions. And we've seen these kinds of numbers shared also. Mr. Duhamel, unfortunately, we started late during the first hour, and then we are running behind also. So I have to give the floor to Mr. Fast, but you can, of course, continue and complete your answers.
The floor is yours for upwards of 5 minutes. No, 5. Go ahead, Mr. Fast.
Well, thank you very much. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. Since early 2023, I have been the president and CEO of Lowen Windows. We are a manufacturer of high-end wooden windows and doors based in Steinbach, Manitoba, located 40 minutes southeast of Winnipeg. Our products are positioned at the high end of the market, with each unit made to custom specifications and the very highest levels of energy efficiency. We are privately owned and have been in business since 1905. We currently employ 700 people in the southeastern Manitoba area, and on any given year, we export over 3/4 of our production to the United States. In Canada, we sell our product directly to home builders and owners, or through small, specialized fenestration dealers, such as Bowen Windows in Ottawa. In the United States, we go to market exclusively through these fenestration dealers who market our products to architects and home builders across that country. In our manufacturing process, we use softwood sourced from both British Columbia and Oregon State. Our glass products come from Southwest Ontario and North Dakota. Hardware comes from Asia or Europe, and over 1 million pounds of aluminum is shaped and painted in either Ontario and Wisconsin before coming to our facilities, and much of our product is European or American in origin. With this type of complicated supply chain, we experience impacts from trade policy, tariffs, and counter tariffs every day. While the street price of aluminum has risen, our product currently comes into Canada tariff-free despite Canada's current 25% counter tariff because of the remission policies currently in place. However, those blanket remissions are scheduled to expire on October 16th, which will drive additional cost and complexity into the industry. Significant changes have had to happen to our current transportation patterns, with products that once traveled through the U.S. now coming directly from Europe that require extra processing. Small service parts and shipments head into the U.S. are now burdened with additional costs and time to clear the border. And with the custom broker industry currently overwhelmed, this is all more complicated than it should be and could be. While we have significant investments underway in plant modernization and informational infrastructure, Lowen finds itself in an awkward position. We are a true medium-sized company. With 700 employees, most government programs are targeted at companies smaller than us. and with only 700 employees, we are too small to effectively access public debt and other large-scale financing available to larger businesses. Over the past 35 years, Lowen has been very successful in manufacturing and exporting our product into the United States. In the past 5 years, we have seen significant supply chain and demand whiplash with COVID, an explosion of multi-jurisdictional rules and regulations, and are now experiencing significant demand and supply side uncertainty in this new trade environment, all while trying to invest in and improve the position of our business in a very competitive market. I am looking forward to my time here and the opportunity to tell our story, and am available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fast. Okay, I'll pass the floor to someone else who lives not too far from Steinbach. Mr. Falk, the floor is yours for 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both of our witnesses for your attendance here at committee this morning. And I too, like Mr. Carr, would indicate I have a specific bias for anyone from Manitoba, but particularly when they come from my riding and my constituency of Provencher. And we are very proud of the fact that Lowen Windows is still in our community after 120 years, and that you've grown the business to the size that you have, and also that you're such a wonderful corporate citizen in the whole Southeast. Mr. Fast, building on some of the comments that you made, you talked about the remission agreement that you currently have on aluminum that you bring in from the United States. Most aluminum is mined in Canada. It's processed and extruded in the United States, and then you bring it back into Lowen Windows and you add value to it at Lowen Windows. Can you tell us a little bit about how that remission agreement has and why you're so concerned about it?
Certainly. So all of our aluminum, correctly so, is extruded in either Canada or the U.S., but painted by a manufacturer in Wisconsin and must then make its way into Canada. Our country currently has a 25% counter tariff in place, however, with 100% remission for Canadian manufacturers. That is set to expire in just under 2 weeks from now. At that point in time, we would now have to pay a 25% tariff, but would be able to ask for a drawback from the Canadian government for any product that we export. So instead of going from a zero-cost free trade environment, we would now have to put significant working capital upfront into tariffs paid to the Canadian government, and then apply for drawbacks, which requires an education and negotiation with CBSA, but would then allow us to claim back any tariffs on product exported to America. That also leaves us in the awkward position where cost to produce product for our Canadian customers is now higher than the cost for our U.S. customers.
So it's very important to you that this agreement gets extended, and we hope that Prime Minister Carney's visit to the United States will yield some positive results this time. You also talked about access to capital and also access to federal government of Canada programs, and the size of your business makes it awkward. Are there programs in particular that you're referring to that you would really be able to take advantage of as Lowen Windows?
SRED is certainly a program where we have minor participation in, but it certainly becomes challenging. Many of the tariff abatement or business or programs that allow our business to tool and invest are targeted at businesses smaller than our own.
Thank you for that. Recently at committee here, I think about 2 weeks ago, we had William Robson, who is the president and CEO of the C.D. Howe Institute, at committee, and he was talking about capital investment, machinery and equipment, and how our American manufacturers are spending the equivalent of just under 12,800 Canadian per worker, and Canadian manufacturers are spending just south of or just north of $4,000 per worker. So they spend about 3 times per worker more on machinery and equipment. You also talked about the uncertainty of the environment that we are currently finding ourselves in. How does that impact your decision to invest in machinery and equipment for your workers to continue to produce and expand your business and improve your quality even more?
Certainly. So I can say that the CD Howe numbers certainly ring true. We are currently investing annually north of $6,000 per employee, so within that range. Much of our equipment, though, is made out of steel and aluminum and is coming from overseas. So we are experiencing uncertainty from a demand perspective. What will happen to demand for our products in the United States as the tariff regime may change from month to month? Lead time for many of the products that we use can range from 8 to 12 months. And so that time frame certainly adds to the challenges that we have in forecasting our U.S. business. We require skilled manufacturing engineers, of which those are always difficult to bring in, and which our immigration policies certainly make it challenging. And then, of course, the cost of the raw inputs have raised the cost of this machinery dramatically over the past 4 years.
Thank you for that. One final question. When I drive by your business, and when I do, I think of it so proudly and fondly. But I often notice that there's a sign on the front boulevard that says that we're hiring. Can you talk a little bit about your access to labor, and can you get the employees that you need to grow your business?
Sure. I would like to say, without expressing any bias, Mr. Falk, our business would not. Our product is custom made, and much of it is handmade by a very talented workforce. It takes us upwards of 8 to 12 months before a new employee truly becomes adept at their job. And so we depend on a stable workforce and have really benefited from the community that we operate in. That being said, manufacturing is an environment where we do experience turnover. On our shop floor, we may see an average turnover of 20% a year, which I think is many manufacturers would be jealous of, but is impactful for our business. We always struggle to bring in technical individuals, particularly manufacturing engineers, product development people, and from there we are recruiting from as far away as Winnipeg, and do occasionally bring in people from outside that work outside the country in both the U.S. and Mexico.
Thank you very much, Mr. Falk. Mr. Bardisi, 6 minutes.
Thank you. A couple of questions for Mr. Fast, and then a couple of questions for Monsieur Duhamel. Mr. Fast, you're in a sector that has some long-standing, in the housing sector, there's some long-standing productivity metrics that haven't moved as much. But you're in the manufacturing part of the housing sector, and you've obviously moved up the value chain. Could you just speak from a firm perspective on what you've done that maybe some of your competitors have not done?
Certainly. I have been involved in the construction industry since I was 18 and a half years old, and we have been concerned about productivity and labor since then. Particularly, we operate, as you said, at the high end of the market, but we still see and are held captive to the productivity challenges in new home construction. We are involved in houses that can take 3 and 4 years to build from the time that they break ground, much of that due to local permitting and labor restrictions. And we build sports arenas in faster times than some of these homes. We operate on a custom perspective, which helps. Let me step back. If you were in the COVID market, you saw 2022 and 2023 as some of your largest years ever, as you were able to stuff the supply chain full of inventory that you pushed off the shelf. We are, as a custom manufacturer, we are tied in tightly with our home builders and architects, and we make nothing until the home is already well under construction. And that certainly helps our ability to not get caught in the whiplash of new residential construction and I'm not sure if I answered your question in the way you were looking for.
That's very helpful. No, that's exactly great. Thank you. You also mentioned capital raising and having access to financing vehicles. The Competition Bureau has just started a study on small and medium enterprise access to lending from the big financial institutions. Without divulging any corporate secrets, could you just tell us the kind of how you've traditionally financed and the role of banks in particular in that?
Yeah, we operate at a very high degree of frankly corporate entity and corporate equity and reinvestment in the business. We have almost no unsecured financing in the business, and very little secured financing in the business. We reinvest with the profits.
Okay. Thank you. And one of the benefits of family enterprise and the long-term horizon, I gather. And that actually takes me, Monsieur Duhamel, vous avez partagé des données très...
Mr. Duhamel, you have given us some very interesting and informative data regarding businesses and the wave of retirements that are coming up. The government has pursued a public policy of encouraging entrepreneurial owners and ownership. I'd like to know how it plays with this policy and if it could help with the solution for the wave of retirements that's coming that you mentioned. Well, thank you very much for this question. Transfers to employees are one of the three main ways to transfer businesses. There's one to employees. It is actually the method that is least preferred by those who are seeding their businesses at 15% in Canada. The most prioritized one is this at a 60% rate since 2018 is to outside entrepreneurs. And the second biggest type of transfers is family business transfers, which is about 25% of intentions in Canada. The point here is that even there are programs to support transfer to employees and that can improve performance in terms of productivity and finances, it's still one of the minor methods of transfer. 75% is a different type of method. Actually, 85% rather are focused on other types of transfers. Thank you very much, Mr. Duhamel. And does public policy can have the potential of increasing external transfers? And should that be a goal of public policy, that is to reduce the proportion of businesses sold to external forces? Well, I would say that from an economic perspective, the most important thing is to ensure that there's a transfer of businesses, really. And that's because there are two main factors that are often neglected in business transfers. And first is that we want to avoid the dissolution of businesses, that the intangible assets, that is a more and more important component of competitiveness rather. And also it's focusing on SMEs that can be transferred in regions outside of large urban areas. Both the people seeding and the buyers of these businesses are the ones who know best what type of transfer would be best, whether it's family, managerial, or external. Thank you very much. Mr. Saint-Marie, you have 6 minutes. Welcome to both of our witnesses, Mr. Fast and Mr. Duhamel. Thank you for being here with us. My questions will be for Mr. Duhamel. So primarily, if you want to finish your presentation, you can take the time to do so. Well, thank you very much. The only point I really want to add more briefly, perhaps, it's one that there is a challenge in terms of entrepreneurial succession and business succession, and the approach that has been used is to, well, imagine having a hose and going to the pool and trying to getting bigger hose and sending more startups to the pool. The problem is that we lose a lot of those entrepreneurs, and the wave of transfers for businesses means that we can conserve and keep the existing SMEs. They are at the basis of a dynamic, productive pool for SMEs. So the way in which to support that transfer or that growth is to support the transfers. But what we see in Quebec is that most of those who are selling the businesses, they don't understand the process very well, and that it's the same thing for buyers. So we end up with fairly high intent to transfer. And the problem is that SME owners may decide to dissolve their business instead. What we see in Quebec in terms of business transfers suggests that it's a very particular market. It's quite opaque. The information shared between sellers and buyers is sensitive information. And so they don't want to provide too much information because they don't want to impact the value of the business. So what that means is that more information needs to be provided so that they better understand how to really transfer a business and understand the breadth of the problem. And that would allow those involved in business transfers and members of the ecosystem to really understand how big of a problem or a challenge that is in their region. That has really helped in Quebec to mobilize all actors, whether it's the Canada Development Bank or the Fonds de Solidarité in Quebec and other actors, in developing strategies to better prepare those involved in business transfers and to train new entrepreneurs and startups so that they will be able to take on a new business in a reasonable timeline. During your presentation, thank you very much, you talked about productivity and the gap between startups and businesses that are transferred. Could you tell us more on that topic? Well, what we're measuring in Quebec, well, imagine this idea. There are three main advantages for productivity when a business is transferred rather than created. The first is that businesses that are transferred are really the jewels of Quebec startups and businesses. And I have no reason to believe it would be otherwise outside Quebec also. Businesses that are being transferred, just to look at my numbers, imagine the average business that is transferred generates $4.6 million in revenue and employs 15 people. And the amount of revenue per employee is $300,000 per employee. That's the value. So these are not just small businesses. Yes, of course, many are transferred. It's really the cream of the crop that we see being transferred from one generation to the next. And that's very much an important point for SMEs, whether it's from employee point of view or revenues or survival rates or this importance of entrance and outgoing resources. What's important to know is that business transfers are underestimated for their potential in increasing competitiveness and productivity, rather, in Quebec and in Canada. Thank you very much. In your presentation, you harken back to Japan, which is seeing its population aging much more quickly than here. At the international level, including in Japan, what would be the practices that you've seen that could be used here for business succession? Well, the international approach, and this comes from Finland, France, Austria, and many others. There are many other countries that are facing this problem. The first is raising awareness. We need to make sure that actors in the ecosystem know what's happening so that we have the numbers so that lawyers, accountants, and so on understand what the demand is in terms of assessing the value of a business. In Quebec, 50% of business owners have absolutely no idea how much their business is worth. So imagine the amount of work that needs to be done on that front. So one would be to develop this awareness. The second would be to develop a national strategy for business transfers. As you know, in Quebec, we're quite well organized. There was a council in Quebec that was set up to help with the business transfers, but this level of intervention needs to be done taking into account what's happening at the local and federal level. At this time, there's no federal roadmap that would help us understand who does what between, for example, Economic Development Canada and entrepreneurial organizations at the Quebec level, for example. So there's a lot of improvisation on that front. My apologies, Mr. Duhamel, but it's already 80 seconds more than the others have gotten, so I have to give the floor to our next speaker for the next 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you to both witnesses for their testimony so far. Mr. Fast, you mentioned in your opening remarks that you employ 700 people and around 85% of your product goes to the United States. And I know you've stated previously that a 25% tariff that had been threatened would instantly raise prices, make your dealers less competitive, hurt their profitability, hurt your bottom line. So the general theme here that businesses require is certainty when it comes to budgeting and capital allocation. So I'm curious if you could tell us how trade uncertainty is impacting your capital investment decisions and, by association, hiring.
Certainly. Let me approach this from two sides. First, the demand side, and then our investment side of the business. When we sell our product, we start that process, and it may be 18 to 24 months before we ship. So we require a great deal of commitment from our sales staff, which are independent business people in the U.S. If these U.S. businesses can't count on us to provide a product at the original prices because of changing tariff environments, it will become an obvious solution for them to move away from Canadian suppliers. And that certainly, once we lose that mind share and market share in the U.S., that is a decades-long process to rebuild. And so having tariffs raise our prices would be an immediate blow to our competitiveness. The second is, as we look at major plant investments, you would expect that for anything of significant size, you are looking at a 4 to 5 year payback time before you start seeing positive cash come back on an investment. And so that certainty in terms of what our ongoing sales outlook may be absolutely drives our ability to invest in new products or to invest in new equipment. And then again, the cost basis of that equipment as it rapidly escalates. We recently shelved one investment product because over the course of the 14 months it took us to build out our business case and decide to go forward, the costs had inflated so much it became unreasonable to go forward with that project. And as a product that is made with a lot of labor input, we need the machines to aid the people, and without machines, we can't hire more people to work them.
I want to pivot here to interprovincial trade barriers? Because you've pointed out that interprovincial trade barriers such as differing energy codes and certification requirements make it harder for companies like yours to operate efficiently within Canada. So how significant are these internal regulatory inconsistencies in limiting your growth within Canada?
Sure. As Mr. Greer said in the prior hour, in our field, it is much regulations as it is actual trade barriers. Canada construction, or the construction in Canada, is ruled by a national building code, but that then becomes fractionalized at a provincial level and then again at a city or regional level. Sometimes that is with common sense. A product in the rain of Vancouver should perform differently than in the snow of Winnipeg, but oftentimes those are strictly because a local city or province wants to put their fingers on the code, and that makes it very challenging to move product back and forth.
So I'll ask a follow-up. Is there anything specific, any specific changes or cooperations between federal and provincial governments that you'd recommend to sort of lower the regulatory red tape burden to help facilitate growth and make you more competitive, both domestically and internationally?
I would echo Mr. Greer's comments. Very excited at the talk 6 months ago about all of the provinces getting ready to harmonize and eliminate trade barriers, and that has gone quiet now. And I do hope that is because of hard work going on in the background and not jockeying for political position.
Last question, quick response if you can. You mentioned layoffs in the past at town halls. What is your company doing to avoid layoffs, and would you be able to sustain that if in the case of long-term uncertainty?
Very quickly, Mr. Fast.
We do some job sharing and have occasionally shut down for a week. That has allowed us to ride through.
Thank you very much. Madame O'Rourke, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Carr. First question for Mr. Fast. I'm hoping that you're aware of the BDC, EDC, and the Regional Tariff Response Initiative, which may be helpful in the coming months for you. I am also hearing from medium-sized businesses in Guelph and nationally that there seems to be a missing middle for manufacturing, that there's support for entrepreneurship, innovation, small business and startup to help them scale, and then there's support for the larger organizations, but that piece in the middle needs something different. And so I'm wondering what programs you think or what supports you think would be helpful for medium-sized businesses.
Thank you for that question. I could not agree more. I would like to echo back. We have all of these new programs, and while I have a limited understanding of the BDC, EDC program, our ability to take advantage of these programs, every one of them comes at a cost of employee attention. And as we work to comply with export regulations and customs and understand tariffs, the reporting requirements of what country of origin aluminum is smelted in, that consumes so much capability. We have had to start hiring consultants to help us comply with human trafficking regulations. And so the ability to take advantage of these programs with less overhead, less requirements, or removing some of the overhead that is already placed on us would really allow us to take more benefit.
Okay, that's a great recommendation for us, and I've made a note of that. You mentioned that some of your manufacturing is taking place in Europe. Are there any opportunities to pivot to some domestic manufacturing around that to build and buy Canadian and to reduce your costs of import?
So we do all of our manufacturing and assembling here in Manitoba and Canada. we have several significant vendors that are located in Europe. And what happened even 6 or 8 months ago is they would ship to a large location in the US where that product may be combined with something that was manufactured in the US and China and then redistributed throughout North America as a complete product. To bypass tariffs, all of those issues have changed, and so now more work is being, in that way, it's a benefit to Canada. More work is being driven into Canada because of those tariff walls.
Thank you. Ma prochaine question serait pour Monsieur Duhamel.
My next question will be for Mr. Duhamel. Listen, we've been talking about productivity for 30 years in Canada, and I'm somebody who's visual. If you had to create a continuum of interventions for the medium to long term to improve productivity in Canada, where would you put the most relevant interventions? What's urgent? What needs to be done over the next 2 years? And what do we need to look at in the longer term? I'm relying on your expertise here to give us some recommendations. Well, I'm not an expert on productivity, so I'm sure other experts will appear before you to tell you more about that. But what I can tell the committee is that given the importance of business transfers, and just to give the example, or to use the example you just gave us, you know, the medium-sized businesses, business transfers for medium-sized businesses represents 8.5% of business transfers. Only 1% of businesses that are dissolved, and a very low percentage also of startups. So the best way to support new businesses with innovation and so on is with SMEs, and I think it's a way of providing support that is new, that is not being used, and that should be looked at. And that's also support for medium-sized businesses. Is that my time? Thank you very much, Ms. O'Rourke. Mr. St. Marie, 2.5 minutes. Mr. Duhamel, in 2.5 minutes, if you could tell us about the need for capital and for subsidies for startups, and also tell us more about what you mean by intangible capital for businesses and any other remarks you have. Thank you very much for this question. So the point here is that earlier I told you about medium-sized businesses, $4 million in revenue, 15 employees. Well, it's clear that entrepreneurs who are 30 and under have a lot of difficulty finding capital to buy businesses. The segment that is seeing the biggest growth is 55 and over. So those who are senior business people or entrepreneurs, as we say, as we call them, are those who are the most likely and who most intend to buy businesses in Quebec, and the same can probably be said for the rest of Canada. So what is intangible capital? That's anything that is called industrial secrets and other implicit and explicit forms of intellectual property, and all of that adds a lot to the value of Canadian businesses. And there are studies from Statistics Canada showing that. So we need to ensure that that intangible capital is passed on. So simply being acquired, where all of the businesses' capital and assets are simply transferred, or worse, if we see these businesses disappear, all that is gone. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone.
Fast, Mr. Duhamel d'être ici avec nous.
Thank you, Mr. Fast, Mr. Duhamel, for being here with us this afternoon.
Available to the committee. Appreciate the insight very much. It's quite useful and helps guide us as we move forward. So we'll dismiss the witnesses. Colleagues, I just wanted to raise one quick thing before we go. Witnesses, thank you very much. You're welcome to drop off. Just as a a matter of practice. So we've been meeting a couple of weeks now, and I think we've gotten a feel for style. I've allowed us quite graciously to go over time in most instances because I always feel my job is to make sure that, no pun intended, we're productive and we're efficient, and there's no use in calling witnesses. The downside to that is that we lose time, right? So every time I allow somebody to go a minute and a half, 2 minutes over, it cuts into someone else's time. So what I'd like to suggest is when we look at the way that we move forward, in the second round, the Conservatives and the Liberals then get in 5 minutes. That's the last two. So that's 10 minutes. What I'd like to suggest is that ultimately the discretion is mine, but I don't want to be a dictator here. So what I would suggest, if everyone is amenable to this, is that we kind of operate with the understanding that we're not going to go to that last part of the second round, and that if we make up the time, then we make the offer. But if we operate with it, I see it as a little bit unfair because a member comes, they've got themselves down on the list, they've prepared a question, and now we're 15, 20 minutes over time. People are saying, Mr. Chair, I've got to get to my next meeting, et cetera. So this is just food for thought. We don't have to make a formal decision, but I just wanted to put it out there that I've really tried to not cut people off, but there comes a point at which, of course, I have to do that because it comes at the expense. So maybe the respective critics for the parties around the table, it's something that we can discuss. But I just wanted to put that out there because I don't want to get in the habit of saying, sorry, witness, you've gone over, you still have something that's going to be useful for the committee to add, but I'm stopping the clock here just for the sake of making sure we end on time. Does that kind of make sense, what I'm proposing? Okay. I share this just as where my thinking is at. Again, il n'y a pas de décision à prendre aujourd'hui, c'est juste un petit...
Again, there's no decision to be made today. It's just a feedback after now that we've had a couple of weeks of meetings under our belt. Merci tout le monde. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.